It's time for another street along. This time we're going to be doing a shawl called Briochealicious by Andrea Mowry. This is a super great way to learn what the heck brioche even is and how to do it. I am using Soft Squish by Independent Street Yarn, and true to its name, it's super soft and super squishy, and it's really going to make the brioche ribbing pop right off of my project. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about brioche. You'll be happy to know that brioche knits and purls are performed exactly the same way that regular knits and purls are performed. There's just one little difference, and that is that each brioche stitch will have an extra piece of yarn draped over the top of it, which we lovingly call a shawl because it's like it's nestled over the stitch's shoulders. It's also helpful to know that you will be using 2 colors of yarn, and you're going to work across each side twice. So on the right side, you're going to take color A and work across, then you're going to use color B and work across. Then you'll turn, then you'll use color A, work across the wrong side, and then color B and work across the wrong side. I know it sounds a little bit confusing, but once you get started, you'll totally get it, and you'll have a really good aha moment once your color work starts to emerge. So let's watch a quick overview of these brioche stitches in action. Don't worry, this is just a demonstration. We're going to go into great detail about how to perform each stitch later on. When you look at brioche, it looks like 2 colored ribbing. On one side, you'll see a stack of knits, and on the other side, in the opposite color, you'll see another stack of knits. Let's look at a brioche purl. You'll see every other stitch is a regular knit stitch, and in between is a brioche stitch. They only differ in the fact that the brioche stitch has an extra stitch with it that we lovingly call a shawl. So we are going to slip the knit stitches, and in doing so, we wrap our yarn around them to turn them into brioche stitches by giving them a shawl. Then we will brioche purl the 2 strands together to turn it into a knit stitch. Not only is the yarn over important to turn a regular stitch into a brioche stitch, but it's also important to place the yarn behind your beautiful stack of knit stitches. Let's forget right here to do a yarn over, and we're going to knit a little ways ahead, and then we're going to look back to see what happened. See how our yarn has intersected our stack of knit stitches? This is a mistake. Don't worry, I'll show you how to fix these since you're bound to encounter them throughout this project. Now let's watch a brioche knit in action. First we bring the yarn to the front before we slip the next regular stitch. Now we have our brioche stitch that we're going to knit, but before we knit it, we need a shawl for the stitch we just slipped. Here's a shortcut. When you go to brioche knit the next stitch, your yarn will go over the needle and automatically create that yarn over, giving that stitch a shawl. Then we can continue. Again, you do not want to yarn over right here, as this will happen automatically when you brioche knit the next stitch. We are now approaching the arrow we made earlier. You can see how the white strand interrupts the knitting. We are simply going to gently pick up that white strand and set it onto the stitch, since it's meant to be a shawl. Now, carefully, we will put our needle under the legs of both strands, and then we can perform a brioche knit. On a purl row, you won't see this mistake nearly as easily. You will only notice it when you approach a stitch that you're supposed to brioche purl, but the shawl happens to be missing. But if you turn your knitting over, you will see it on the back side. Gently pick it up and put it on the needle with your current stitch, and then brioche purl them together. Error fixed. This stitch has a crazy name, but really it's easy to perform. All we do here is perform a brioche knit, but we are going to leave the strands on the left needle. Then we're going to perform a yarn over, and finally we're going to brioche knit those same 2 strands again. This is an increase, and it increases this stitch by 2. Don't worry, even though these are regular stitches now, we will add shawls to them later by turning them into brioche stitches. Counting with contrasting color is easy. You simply look under the shawl to find the opposite colored stitch and count that stitch, along with its shawl, as 1. The regular stitches are much more obvious to count. Counting with all the same color can be a bit more difficult. Just go nice and slow, and sometimes you might have to wiggle the stitches apart from each other so that it becomes a little more clear which stitch is a brioche stitch and which stitch is a regular stitch. Okay, so now we know that a brioche knit is the same as a regular knit, but we're just knitting 2 strands. And we know the same goes for a purl. So it's time to dive into the actual project, and we're gonna learn each of these stitches in depth so that we can make this super awesome Briochealicious shawl. We start this shawl with a Garter Tab Cast On. Using color A, you are going to use your favorite cast on method. Here I am going to use the long tail cast on to cast on 2 whole stitches. That's it. Now we begin the tedious process of knitting 11 rows of 2 stitches. That's a lot of turning, a lot of untangling, and a lot of counting. Let's speed this up just a little bit. Finally, we're done. Let's identify the 5 garter ridges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are important as we will pick up and knit 1 stitch into each of these bumps along the edge. Using your needle, insert under 1 purl stitch bump, yarn over, and then pull up a stitch. Do this 4 more times under the remaining 4 garter bumps. Clearly this can be tedious, so go very slow and work with intention. The last bump may be hard to find, so you might have to hunt around for it a little bit. Now it's time to turn the work and pick up 2 stitches along the bottom. 1 and 2. Again, using your best judgment, find a purl bump to insert the needle into and pick up a stitch. Let's count. You should have 9 stitches on your needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're good to go. Time to start the garter goodness section. Row 1 is pretty easy. The only tricky part is the K1FB, which we'll demonstrate here. You start with a regular knit, but you leave the stitch on the left needle. Then insert the needle into the back loop of the stitch, performing a knit. Then you can remove the stitch from the left needle. Increase done. Now we'll knit across to the last 4 stitches. Since we just got started, this happens pretty quickly. Now we perform another K1FB, so you get another crack at it. Then your knit, then your yarn over, then 2 more knits, and now we can turn. Once you've turned, let's count the stitches. You'll notice this row says 2 stitches increased, but we actually have increased 4 stitches. What's that about? You'll see shortly that the yarn over from the previous row will get dropped to make the border much less tight. So we always knit the first 2 stitches of our border. Then you simply push the yarn over off the needle. Knit 1 more, then it's time for a knit front back front. It's very similar to the knit front back, but we just perform 1 more knit in the front before pulling the stitch off of the left needle. This increases the stitch by 2. This time we knit across to the last 5 stitches. Perform yet another knit front back front. Knit 1, drop that yarn over, then knit our last 2. This garter goodness section is made up of only these 2 rows. Easy, right? You'll repeat these 2 rows over and over and over again until you have 99 stitches on your needle. Then you'll get this beautiful crescent-shaped beginning of a shawl. Don't forget to count. At this point, I like to put a marker on the right side just to help me find my way. Now it's time to bust into brioche. Let's walk through setup row 1A. We will knit 2, then yarn over, then purl 1. Be careful here. As you go to purl the 3rd stitch, you'll notice that your yarn over is missing. All you really did was bring the yarn to the front of the work. So let's make sure that the yarn over here is present before we purl that 3rd stitch. Now we work a slip 1 yarn over. Hey, we just added our first shawl and we've just created our very first brioche stitch. Then we purl, then we slip 1 yarn over. Then another purl, then another, slip 1 yarn over. Do this all the way across. Once you get near the end, keep going in this pattern until you reach the last 3 stitches. Then purl 1. Then you'll yarn over and knit 2. Remember, when you purl and make an immediate knit stitch without moving the yarn, it makes what I like to call an auto magic yarn over. Okay, here's where things get weird. Instead of turning, to start setup row 1B, we're going to slide the work back to the other needle and begin again with color B. You can see that color A is still attached on the opposite end. Just make sure it's out of the way for now. To start, we're going to slip the first 4 stitches, leaving them unworked. Next, we perform a brioche knit, but this time we want to use color B. So as you go to brioche knit the next stitch, pick up color B, loop it over your needle, and perform the brioche knit. Make sure to drop your tail. Then, of course, we bring the yarn to the front, slip 1, and when we go to brioche knit the next stitch, don't forget we get an automatic yarn over. That creates the lovely shawl over the stitch shown in white, turning it into a brioche stitch. Then we continue on to the end. Once you get to the last 5 stitches, don't forget how to count the brioche stitches, by the way, perform one last brioche knit, drop color B to the back, and then slip the last 4 stitches, leaving them unworked. Finally, we can turn it over. You'll notice now that you have 2 balls of yarn hanging off this one side of your knitting. This is normal. Sometimes that extra strand can get in the way, so just keep an eye on it and try to keep it out of the way. Using color A, we'll knit our 2 border stitches, drop the yarn over, just like normal, knit 1 more, then we'll do a yarn front, slip 1, yarn over. Again, I'm sure I sound like a broken record, but the yarn over here will happen automatically. Time for our fun increase stitch. The next stitch requires a brioche knit since it has a shawl. So to do the increase, we'll brioche knit this stitch, leaving the 2 strands on the left needle, perform a yarn over, then do yet another brioche knit into that same stitch. Bam! We've turned 1 stitch into 3. Increase done. Now we simply do a yarn front, slip 1 yarn over, followed by a brioche knit, and you'll do those 2 stitches all the way across. Once you've reached the last 7 stitches, you'll do another yarn front, slip 1 yarn over, then another fancy increase. Finish off the row with another yarn front, slip 1 yarn over, a knit 1, drop that space-saving yarn over, and then knit your 2 border stitches. Remember, this is only row 1A. We still have row 1B to do on the same side, so time to slide. We will be purling with color B, so make sure it's on the front of the work before starting. Slip the first 3 stitches, leaving them unworked. You can see the first stitch is a brioche stitch, so using color B, let's brioche purl it. Then we'll do a slip 1 yarn over, then 1 purl, and yes, it's just a regular purl since these increases don't quite have shawls yet. Then we're going to bust right into the pattern of slip 1 yarn over, and then brioche purl. Slip 1 yarn over, brioche purl. Once you've made your way across to the last 7 stitches, we'll do a slip 1 yarn over, a purl, another slip 1 yarn over, a brioche purl, then we can drop B to the front of the work and slip the last 3 stitches. Time to turn. Now that we're getting more comfortable with what we are doing, this row will be very easy. We will knit 2, do our yarn over, and then purl 1. You can see here I forgot to do a yarn over the second time, so I'm actually missing my yarn over, but I easily fixed it when I went back on the next row. Now I'm going to slip this first stitch, and because we just joined color B, it's loose, so just give it a little tug before you perform your yarn over. Then we'll do a brioche purl. Continue with a slip 1 yarn over, followed by a brioche purl, all the way across. Once you're at your last 4 stitches, you're going to slip 1 yarn over, purl 1, and then knit the last 2, and this will create an automatic yarn over. Time to slide. Slip the first 4 stitches, then alternate between a brioche knit and a yarn front slip 1 yarn over, all the way across. Once you hit the last 5 stitches, Do one last brioche knit, drop B to the back, then slip the last 4 stitches. Whew! We got through all 4 rows of the pattern. Let's check out what it looks like. You can see we've got stacks of knits of color B on this side and stacks of knits of color A on the other. Now just follow the instructions to repeat these rows until you get to the section finishing rows. Row 1 is easy, so we won't show it, but row 2 is a little tricky. Since these finishing rows are with color A, you can break color B. On this row, you are now using the same color yarn when you do your slip 1 yarn over. This is going to make the next row just a touch tricky since now you do not have 2 colors to easily identify your stitches. Now we get a break from brioche. On the first row of garter goodness, you are going to knit all of the stitches, including the brioche stitches. Again, since all of these are the same color, just go slowly and carefully until you get all the way across. Then just follow the instructions for garter goodness until you have a nice band of garter stitch. Then, using color C, you'll repeat the Briochealicious section. Then, more garter goodness. Then, one more section of Briochealicious with color D. Finally, you'll do a simple border in garter goodness, and then bind off using Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. I'm showing you how to do this in the white yarn, even though you'll be doing it in color B. Work a reverse yarn over, then knit 1, then take the last 2 stitches and pass them over the current stitch and off the end of the needle. Continue in this manner until all stitches have been bound off. That was a lot of information and a lot of really cool techniques, and I really hope that you enjoyed learning brioche with me because I had a great time learning it so that I could teach it to you. I hope you enjoy your big squishy Briochealicious shawl, and I will see you in the next knit along.